That was unbelievable. Thank you. This is more the California I grew up in, and so thank you so much for having me. I don't think I've ever had an introduction like that, so I'm grateful for it. It's always such a poignant experience to come back to the state, which obviously produced me, and which I loved, and you know, it's changed in a lot of ways. But then I come here, and I'm like, no, this is exactly the group of people I grew up around, and so you just make me feel so much better. You have no idea. No, I'm sincere. And by the way, this library is remarkable. I've never been here before. Whenever I grew up in Los Angeles and then La Jolla, and so when I'm here, I'm in one of those two places, or out in the desert or something. But I have never been here, and I was kind of stunned by it, actually, and also stunned by what I'd missed about the Nixon presidency. So my first memory of my life, actually, that I remember was sitting in our kitchen in Los Angeles watching, in the summer of 1974, I was 5, the president resign. And so that kind of defined what I thought of the presidency, I guess. And as much as I spend my entire life trying to resist buying into or internalizing these absurd storylines that are presented to me, the propaganda that bombards us constantly, it's hard not to kind of internalize some of it, if you know what I mean. If you're swimming in a bath full of food coloring, you're going to come out that color, kind of, is the truth. And, I'm 49 years old. It had never occurred to me a single time to think about everything that happened during the Nixon presidency. I mean, not major stuff, but just like, ending the Vietnam War. Stuff like that, or putting a man on the moon, just the kind of parenthetical things that happened. Or opening up China to the world. And I thought of the administrations I've covered breathlessly, as if this was really significant stuff. I covered the 1996 Dole versus Clinton election. I can't remember who won, actually. Because time really does put things into perspective. And you sort of wake up one morning and you're like, well, why was I so mad about that? Or why did I think that was so very important at the time? And the truth is, it's almost always because everyone around you who talks loudest was saying it was the most important thing. And even if you think for yourself, if you're an independent thinker, you end up kind of believing it, I guess. And that's why propaganda still exists, because it works. So if you live in a world where everybody on every channel is like, Russia! Even if you think it's stupid, after a while you begin to think that Russia is somehow relevant to something, which of course it's not. And in 30 years, I think the rest of us will be sitting around having a drink in our old age saying, what was that? Remember that Russia thing? That was insane, actually. I'm not waiting 30 years. I'm saying that now. Dead sober. Anyway. I couldn't be more grateful to be here. We're on this long book tour. This is just a respite. This is a spa treatment for me. I know, in a wholesome, fully clothed way, but I mean, it really is. It's a spiritual spa treatment anyway. Eucalyptus scented. I wrote this book. I did not intend to write a book because I have a day job. I was once a writer. I've written other books, and the one takeaway from that was it's really hard to write a book. And it's something that you do alone, typically in your basement, covered in sweat, eating fig Newtons, feeling angry. I think I may have revealed too much about my process, but whatever. And I thought, the first 2 times I did it, I thought, that's one thing I'm never doing again, because why would I? That's really, really, really hard. It's like painting your house. It's like one of those things you're like, I'm not going to pay someone else. How hard is it to paint a house? Try it. Right. Anyway, so I got this job, and, I'm not getting super rich, but enough that I don't have to write a book, and I'm not going to write a book. I got so mad that I decided to write a book just as catharsis to get it out. And I was mad about a really simple thing. Well, everything in my life is very simple because I'm a talk show host. I'm not an intellectual. I'm not a particularly deep thinker. I'm actually fairly shallow, which has served me well, by the way. I'm not joking. So I was mad about a very simple thing. It had nothing to do with quantum physics, do you know what I mean, or decoding the human genome. It really was the most obvious of all questions, and what infuriated me, and does even now thinking about it, was the fact that it was never publicly asked or debated. And the question, of course, was, why did Donald Trump just become the president? Yeah, because that was something nobody expected. And when I say nobody, I mean nobody. Not the Republicans, not the Democrats, not Trump's staff, nobody. Not one person called that. Well, you did. You did. You must be, here's what I've learned. Actually, that's not true. I did meet one person, and he's a university professor at a college in upstate New York I've never heard of before or since, and he's a native German speaker who barely speaks English and knows nothing about American politics. And the point is, he was so off the grid mentally that it was obvious to him. So if you take a piece of pork sausage and hold it in front of a dog, and then recite the Gettysburg Address, the dog does not hear a word you say because he doesn't speak English. He looks only at the pork sausage. And so the only people who could see what was going to happen are the people who are not distracted by all the noise. And this guy who didn't know anything about American politics just parachutes in and he's like, yeah, Trump's going to win. And everyone's like, yeah, German guy, shh, adults are talking. But anyway, the point is, the rest of us didn't think this was likely because it wasn't likely. Because even if you thought the Republican was going to win, there was a fairly deep bench of those to choose from. Like a very deep bench. I think there was over 100 Republican candidates, or several hundred, whatever. There's a lot. And it's like, why wouldn't you pick one of those? Why would you pick the guy who'd never been in politics at all? Yeah, that's the answer. Exactly. That's the answer. So what I found so striking, having, again, spent a year of my life following Trump around, who I knew, by the way, just because I'm in the media, and like everyone in the media knows Trump, for 20 years. What I found so striking was not that people in Washington were mad that he got elected, and boy, were they, on a bipartisan basis, too. And this didn't really get reported, I don't think, to the extent it should have been, simply because it was reality. Reality is often the one thing that's never reported. But the people who were maddest were actually the permanent Republican establishment in Washington, really mad. And they were mad because they felt really threatened by Trump. And then, of course, the Democrats, I mean, this was like literally their nightmare. Actually, that's not true. Let me just note for a second. Trump is not what they feared. So growing up in this state, and I grew up around liberals, honestly, they would always tell you what they feared. They would always say, if Republicans ever got total control, what's the thing they would do? I mean, for 50 years, Democrats said the same thing. Turn this into a theocracy. You know what I mean? And like, it would be the Handmaid's Tale, and it would be basically a medieval country where women would be in some kind of coverings, and you know what I mean? We'd be speaking Old English, and we'd sort of ban happiness, and you know what I mean? And like, we're going to elect Jerry Falwell to do that, and it's those religious nuts who are so scary. But when it actually happened, it being the election they feared most, it was not that at all. It was a very kind of secular New Yorker who'd been in the casino business, who was not an evangelical at all. I'm not mocking, just there are different kind of cultures in this country, and that wasn't his. My friend did the famous interview where he asked Trump what his favorite book of the Bible was. And Trump goes, the Bible. My friend goes, no, but what's your favorite book of the Bible? And Trump, like, it's a trick question, obviously. He's like, narrowing his eyes, like, look, the Bible, okay? I think he's learned a lot since then, but the point is, this was not what they expected. It's not what they predicted. It wasn't the fever dream that had haunted them for decades. It was the opposite of that, and they found it more threatening. Now, why is the question? So first, to the initial query, which is, why did this happen? And in Washington, this is what made me so angry. The explanations were so contemptuously dumb that I just couldn't even sit there and listen to them. And for the first week I did, because these are the conventional stages of grief, something that happens, that you don't like and that you don't want to happen. So of course, immediately, your first reaction is denial. Like, well, that actually didn't happen. Didn't happen. Got elected president? Yeah, I don't think so. No. It can't happen, therefore it didn't. So your first instinct is just kind of project your will and erase reality. Well, that doesn't work ever. So your second reaction is to convince yourself that you have power over something that you have no power over. So we're going to beat this. And well, how are you going to beat it? You just won. We're going to take it from the Electoral College. That's never been done. Really? You're really going to do that? Yeah, yes, we are. Yes, we can. Si se puede. Yes, we can. And they actually kind of convince themselves of that. Well, that was insane. And by the way, totally non-democratic. So when that didn't happen, they went to the third stage, which is, some unseen actor did this. This is how, Stalin used to explain the failure of the potato famine. It's like the Soviet system is awesome. It works perfectly. And if it weren't for unseen saboteurs, we would have reached our goal. And so the unseen saboteurs, of course, were Putin. Putin did it. And I remember when they first hit me with that storyline, the first guest came on, it was like the first week of my show. Yeah, it was Putin did it. I'm thinking, really? Putin did it? This is a country that can't build a working escalator and they subverted our election? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. My mind is open. Got an economy the size of Texas, life expectancy of 47, everyone's drunk. Maybe they did. But you're going to have to show me some evidence. And that was, shall we say, not forthcoming 2 years into it, because it didn't happen. It's like demented. And then the third explanation, which you're actually seeing now quite a bit, is that Trump is a bad person, a singularly bad person, the worst person who's ever lived, okay? He made Idi Amin look like Mother Teresa, okay? He's just that bad. And when he does something, he does it for the pure animal joy of inflicting cruelty on another living person. I'm serious. I watched MSNBC today getting dressed in my hotel room. They were saying that. Why did he do this? Because he enjoys hurting people. He just loves it. So they've been saying that for a couple of years, but the new explanation is he got elected because a lot of America is exactly the same. And what they loved about Trump were his bad qualities. Those were the most appealing. And I thought, I traveled a lot. I never met I interviewed 1 million Trump voters trying to understand this. I never met one who said, you know what, I was on the fence until I saw the Access Hollywood tape. And then I thought to myself, finally a candidate who speaks for me. Now you're talking my language, buddy. I love this man. I'm sorry. There wasn't such a person. Nobody felt that way. People voted for the candidate in spite of his shortcomings, and they did so not with the expectation that he had profound policy expertise. There were a lot of people who did. They didn't get chosen. They voted for him with the expectation that he would awaken the people in charge of America on the first Tuesday of November 2016 and let them know that they had failed, demonstrably failed, and worse than that. And by the way, let me just say, I'll just be blunt. As a Christian, I do believe in forgiveness and redemption, and I believe in being honest about the limits of human power and human wisdom and decision-making. We screw it up a lot. I certainly do. By the way, because of YouTube, you can see my screw-ups. I always deny that I was in Dancing with the Stars, but I actually was. Okay? So I don't judge. I don't. But here's the difference. I never went on Dancing with the Stars again. So that really is it. That's what we ask of people, and that's what we need to demand of our leaders, is not that they don't make mistakes, but that they acknowledge the mistakes that they make and critically learn from them. Learn from them. I have a ton of children, like a ton. And I'm never surprised when they do something wrong. Because I'm not. Because I'm never surprised when people do. Because I know what people are about. Because I am one. What I demand of them is that they acknowledge that they did it and that they pledge to be better. That's it. That's all we can ask. It's all we should ask. But when people exert power over us, we have a right to expect it, okay? And if they don't perform that simple human task of learning from their errors, and if instead they deny those errors, and if instead they go even farther and blame us for those errors, then they are unfit to rule. It's that simple, okay? So I would say to compound this, the mistakes made by the people in charge, and by the way, I'm not limiting this to our political class in Washington. I would say they're uniquely guilty. But I would say also of the people who make the decisions that shape our economy, broadly speaking, and those who shape our culture, the people who determine what your kids watch on television or at the movie theater or online. They made a series of bad decisions over decades that had measurable effects on the population that were bad and well known to anyone who cared to learn them. So in 2015, when I learned this, I wrote the book. In 2015, the middle class in this country became a minority. And I read that in some relatively obscure place, by the way. I did not read that in the New York Times or the Washington Post. Not that I read either one anymore, but I did for many years. No, I read it in some website, and I thought, well, that can't be true. So I checked, and it was true. And I thought, well, I'm in the news business. My job is to follow developments, big and small, sometimes picayune, really small. This is not only a major development, it's a pivot point in the history of the country. You can't have a functioning democracy, or by the way, a functioning market economy, without a robust middle class that comprises the majority of your country, period. And by robust, I mean really simple, self-supporting, not dependent upon government, living cheerfully, by and large, with the hope of doing better, and with the near certainty that their kids could do better if they apply themselves. It's not a hard definition. It's a common sense one. And for my entire life, in fact, for the entire life of our country that we can measure, that has been the majority of our country. And in 2015, it became a minority. Now, I left California, but if I lived here, I would have already known that, because that's the story of this state. And it's the saddest thing about this state. It's not that there aren't rich people. There are the richest people in the world live here. I just flew in from San Francisco this morning. And it's not that there aren't poor people. There are more poor people in California than any other state. Like a third of all welfare recipients live in one state, this one. So you got plenty of people at the polls. And by the way, you will always have rich people. You'll always have poor people. Society will always be stratified because people are hierarchical. Just that's their nature. The egalitarian ideal is not achievable. Dogs are hierarchical, by the way, so I think it's a mammal thing. But whatever. But in order to have a healthy, stable society, you have to have most people in the broad, happy center. And when that starts to change, you have not simply a moral problem. This isn't a college dorm room debate about what's just or not. Who cares? You have a very practical problem where your country's going to become super volatile, really volatile. And you might have, just throwing this out there, like a populist movement where voters get so mad they elect somebody out of nowhere. No, I'm serious. That's what happens. And wise leaders would anticipate this because it is so obvious I thought of it. This is not complex in any way. This is Leadership 101. But they didn't come to that conclusion, or more precisely, they didn't care to come to that conclusion because they didn't care. Which leads you to the second obvious conclusion about our leadership class, and I mean across sectors here. I mean, this applies every bit as much to the tech sector. Travis, what's his name at the car company? What is it? No, Travis Kalanick, the teenage billionaire who runs Uber, whatever. Our tech chieftains, as it does to our U.S. senators. They didn't actually care. And I guess I've already noticed at the outset, I'm a lifelong conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm not in therapy. I'm not the kind of person who talks the touchy-feely language of the town I grew up in at all, okay? So this is not a touchy-feely observation. It's a true one, and it's really simple. Empathy is a prerequisite for leadership. You have to deeply care about the people you're in charge of, or you will not do a good job of leading them. And this is true across the board. It's true in your family. If you don't love your children, if you wouldn't give your life for your children, you will be a bad parent and hurt them. So the question is not, are you going to be a perfect parent and make a flawless series of decisions? No, you're not. You're going to screw it up. But in the end, if you care more deeply about your children than anything else, you'll be a good enough parent. You will be, every one of you. Empathy is the key to parenthood. But it's also the key to every other kind of leadership. If you didn't care about the safety of your men, would you be a good officer? No, they would die. If you didn't really care about your employees, would your company thrive? Of course not. If you didn't care in a democracy about your voters, would you be an effective politician? No, you'd be the ones we just kicked out. So that's it right there. And I would say part of the key, and I see this all the time, I saw it tonight. Trump gives these speeches, usually during the primetime hours, multiple a week. He loves it. And I have to say, it's pretty impressive in a way, as someone who talks for a living, that he'd stand up there on national television with no notes at all at like 71. I'm 49, I can barely do it. And he gets up there and he just goes. He doesn't know what the terminus is. He doesn't know what the destination is. He just gets on the bus. I don't care. I'm serious. Just give me a Diet Coke and let me start talking. We actually always say, because they often happen during our hours, so we're watching carefully. And my producers always say, when he gets to Space Force, we're almost done. I should also note, I have no idea what Space Force is, but I love it. I literally have no idea. I'm not sure they do actually know what it is either, but I can say that if my son, who's 21, called me, he's a senior in college, and said, you know what, I thought I was going into, whatever, private equity, but I think I'm joining Space Force. I would be my first question would be, what's the uniform like? The second question would be, the second thing I would say is, I'm so proud of you, boy. Anyway, but the point is, other than Space Force, the one recurring moment in every Trump speech, and the reason that people like these speeches so much, is he actually does, because he's not working strictly from a script, he does get caught right up in it. I mean, it's just you see who he is in the speech, because that really is who he is. And trust me, I know him. That's who he is. This is exactly, less profanity, probably slightly less, but that's actually him. And he gets so caught up in it, there's always one moment where he looks out and they start cheering him, and of course he loves that, and he goes, you know what? I love you. I love you. First of all, who talks like that? The answer, of course, is only people who mean it. And by the way, there are many kinds of love. I don't know if this is a love that's gonna call you the next day. I don't judge. But in that moment, it's totally real. It's 100% real. He stops in the middle of this, he looks out and he's like, you know what? I love these people. And because he's emotionally incontinent, he can't keep that in. And no, I'm not joking. And the first time it happened, having spent a whole lifetime watching political speeches, I'm like, what was that? And then I realized that was an authentic moment. And the crowd understands that, not because they think about it, but because they can feel it. Because the truth, the deep truth, underneath all of it is we know who you are. This is true of everyone. A lot of our conversations are pure 100% pretense, where we're all overthinking things and rationalizing them and going along with someone else's rationalization when the truth is right in front of our faces. You meet someone for 2 minutes and you know who that person is. You can smell it. It's an animal sense that we're born with. And other species don't override it with their higher brain, but we do. And I always tell my children, don't do that. If you think someone's dishonest, if you can smell it, he's dishonest. That person's dishonest. And I'm sorry to sound like a Democratic senator now. I do believe in due process, by the way. I don't think we ought to imprison anyone on the basis of odor. But I do think because I believe in fairness, but I do believe in our personal lives, we always know who other people are. Always. Who is really shocked by anything we've learned about any president, ever? Yeah, Bill Clinton with an intro. Oh, I can't believe, doesn't sound like the Bill Clinton I know. What? Yeah, it does. Everything I have learned about Trump, good and bad, I'm like, yeah, I know the guy. Not because I went to high school with him, but because I've talked to him and I've watched him. It's true of everybody. I always say to my children, the upside is, it's not all bad. You think you're hiding things about yourself. You're really envious, or you're an alcoholic, or you're sort of secretly mean, or whatever your kind of hidden sin is. Everybody already knows that, actually. It was like a bad toupee. You're like, I'm fooling them now. No, you're not. Not for 1 second. People are like, there's something weird about your hair. They don't say it, but they know it. And as I always say to my children, it's kind of horrifying to realize that every time you interact with another person, you are stripped bare. You really are stripped bare. But the good news is a lot of them love you anyway. Like, it's actually not worth pretending when you start to think about it. They already know. And the one thing they know about Trump is that in his way, he does love them, actually. He does. And maybe it's a fleeting love. I don't know what kind of love it is. But it's a lot more love than they're getting from anybody else in power. It's true. And that's why they love him back. It's so not complicated. It's actually so helpful. I said at the outset, being shallow is just like the greatest gift I have ever. I'm not kidding. I would recommend it. As I was writing this book, I have 2 dogs. My wife and I have 2 dogs. All our 4 children are gone. It seems like that's the question. Like, that's the first thing you would have to answer before proceeding, and running NATO or sending it money. Why do we have it? And by the way, I remember when the Soviet Union fell. I was on my honeymoon. It was August of 1991. I'll never forget. I was in Bermuda on the beach. And the guy who brought the drinks, like, the Soviet Union fell. Oh, really? So, no, true story. Mid-Ocean Club, Bermuda, 1991. That was August of 91, so that's 27 years later. Trump is like, why do we still have it? So, I don't know if he was testing this on me or what, but he goes out and he asks that question. That literally, he wasn't attacking, he was like, why do we still have it? It's a fair question. Hey, NATO experts, what's the answer? You know what answer he got? What? Shut up! What are you working for Putin? That's treason! And it sort of reminded me of that moment when if you have children, they go through this why stage when they're little. And it's like infuriating. And they'll be like, well, why? Why are we doing that, Mommy? Oh, well, Danny, we're doing that because we're doing that, and that's what adults do. Well, why? Well, because it's the right thing to do, Danny. Well, why? But why are we doing it? Why is it the right thing to do? Mommy's getting a glass of wine, Danny. Why don't you be quiet? And that's exactly the response Trump got. Shut up, they explained. And that is the tell. That's it right there. If we were playing poker, we'd win. Because what they're saying is, our hand, there's nothing in it. We don't have an answer to the question we're supposed to be in charge of. We're the NATO experts. Take that moment and multiply it by, I don't know, every policy. Why don't we have a wall? Where I live, it's like, well, because the wall is stupid. Why is it stupid? Because walls are bad. Really, you have them around your house. Why are they bad? Well, because countries don't have walls. Well, some do. Well, walls are bad. Shut up. Okay, I'm willing to believe walls are bad. I'm willing to believe NATO should still exist, but why? Shut up, Danny. Mommy's getting a glass of wine. That's it. And by the way, that's enough. Because Trump will be gone. We will all be gone, by the way. We're just passing through. This is just a spot on a continuum that goes on, we hope, a long time. But if you want to fix the country, you have to describe with some precision what's wrong with it. You need to bring the conversation back to what matters. And that is a profound contribution. Whether those questions are answered and the issue solved or not, we are finally talking about things that actually matter. And thank God for that. Ha! Sorry, I totally lost control. Okay, I'm sure I way overspoke, so I did, didn't I? Yes, I did. You're nodding. Okay.
Tucker, thank you, Tucker. He's agreed to take a couple of questions, and we do have some time. Our first one is going to be from this gentleman who I drug out from the back, so you guys all up front don't get the first round here. Our first question.
Yes, sir. So first of all, on behalf of the state of California and the land of gracious living, thank you for your talents.
Thank you.
Good. Secondly, my question is, my wife, Ellen, is right there. In April of 2016, her and I knew Donald Trump was going to win. In fact, I stood in front of a university crowd with a reporter in the crowd and stated that exact statement.
I'm impressed.
I was destroyed in that article.
I bet you were.
On November 6th of 2016, I know where I was. I would like for you to recant that evening and where you were on the night of November 6th, 2016.
Well, I was where I spent much of my life on a TV set and in New York City with, a bunch of people I know. And as this began to happen and it became clear, so without getting too boring, but we get these things called exit polls, which are just surveys of voters as they leave the polling place. And they're done by a group of news organizations, or they're done by various organizations. But we get them because we're a news organization. And they supposedly give us insight into what the result's going to be so we can prepare ourselves for our sparkling commentary. And the exit polls all showed what we expected, which was that Trump was going to lose. I have to say now, it sounds like I'm bragging, I didn't necessarily think Trump was going to lose because I live in Washington, not New York, and the day before I had taken the Acela, which is our train. I think you're about to get one. Goes from I think it goes from Chino to San Juan Capistrano or something. Yeah, trust me, that was heavy irony, just so you know. Mass transit in California. Yeah, it's a perfectly, Rhode Island maybe. Okay, but anyway, but I had been on the train to New York and I ran into actually a guy I knew from San Francisco. And he was a lawyer in San Francisco, super nice guy, and big Democrat. And he had worked for Clinton, whatever, sort of moderate Democrat. And he sits next to me. I said, hey, man, I think you're in San Francisco. I thought you were at a law firm there. Yeah, I am, but I got called in. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to Philadelphia. I said, what are you doing in Philadelphia? He said, there's an all-hands-on-deck call that, politically active Democrats who have time to volunteer and can pay their own plane fare need to get to Pennsylvania right away. And I was like, why would they get to Pennsylvania? You're up 1,000,000 points. Everyone knows Pennsylvania can't, go Republican. Like, what? Donald Trump? This we know. And he's like, no, they think they're going to lose Pennsylvania. Oh, really? So I made a couple calls on the train. Oh, yeah, they're panicked. Well, if they lose Pennsylvania, then there are a bunch of other states like Pennsylvania demographically that they could easily. That's when I thought, wow, this could actually happen. So I wasn't maybe quite as confused just on the basis of that as some of the people, but there were people who do not work at Fox but who would come in as analysts for the night. I think you know who they are. And I happened to be sitting next to one of them, and they were very upset, very upset. And not because they're liberal, they're not, but because Trump was an enormous orange middle finger wagging in their face. I'm serious. It was. That's exactly what it was. If Trump gets elected, and I have spent the last year assuring people that, there's no way. Look, I cover this. Look, okay. If I have a question about plumbing, I'll ask you, but if you've got a question about politics, this stuff's complicated, okay? I've run a few campaigns in my time, maybe you recognize me. If you've been saying that stuff for a year, and all of a sudden on national TV live it turns out that you're dumb, even your wife is like, really? You've got one job to call a stupid election that happens once every 4 years and you get it backward? How did that happen? So it really was personally threatening to them, to such an extent that actually I finally left. I was like, this is too tense. I don't even want to be here. And actually, it's funny you asked that. I don't smoke anymore. I haven't smoked in years, but I go outside, there was a cameraman smoking. And I was like, give me one of those. I did. It was an American Spirit Blue. I ripped the filter off. It was delicious. Last cigarette I'll ever have. But I thought, you know what? Trump gets elected. I'm not supposed to smoke. Obviously, it's bad. But I'm going to do it this one time because, in my own sort of private way, it was my little act of defiance. You know what I mean? That's about as defiant as you can get in a liberal town. Anyway, excuse me.
Next question to your right, sir.
Yes.
Tucker, a lot of people always ask, how do we come back together? My question is, isn't where we are and isn't a certain amount of friction a good thing for democracy?
I think it is if we all buy into the precepts of democracy, which are that people get to express, the basic point about democracy is that people have a voice. All people do, even if they belong to a particularly unfashionable group. And that's the point of Trump's election. And it was the most distressing part about the election, actually, was that it confirmed, look, for democracy to work, everyone has to believe that it's real. They really do. And if after, the Immigration Act that changed the country passed in 1965, okay? So that was 51 years before the last election. So during that time, every public opinion poll taken on the question of immigration showed the same thing, which is Americans like immigrants, obviously. No country has ever admitted in peacetime as many immigrants as we have. It's not even close. This has never happened in world history, and we don't have riots because Americans are nice people. Despite what you hear on CNN, they're nice people, actually. They're not bigots. They're very open-minded, and they're very nice, and they like immigrants, and they should, because immigrants are awesome. But they also believe that it's their country, and they have a right to determine who comes here. They're sort of I'm not against dinner parties. I love dinner parties. We have them all the time. I choose 12 people, and they come and have dinner at my house. If I didn't get to choose them, if 12 randoms showed up and started eating my food, that would not be a dinner party. It would be a home invasion, okay? So, no, it's true. The difference is that you have control over one, and the other is being imposed upon you by force. And so, for all these decades, Americans have said exactly that. The overwhelming majority, we want to have control. And we don't. And so what do you conclude after a while? You conclude that I keep voting, I keep putting quarters in the slot machines, and the bars never come up. It's rigged. It's not real. And I don't think that's healthy. If people believe that they have a voice, maybe not a huge voice, not as big a voice as George Soros, but he's a billionaire, I get it, okay? And a very good person. Or Tom Steyer or whatever. No, obviously joking. But look, there are, people who have enough money to buy their own media outlets have more political power than those of us who don't. I get it. But all of us have some power because we can vote. And if we vote in large groups, they have to listen to us. That is the basic understanding of democracy, and that's what keeps the country calm. And that's what all of us growing up in this country were taught as small children. That's why it's a good country, by the way. Because if you don't like something, you don't have to storm the Bastille or burn the police station. You can vote, and you can do it every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. You have lots of opportunities. And over time, maybe not immediately, but over time, they will listen to you because the system will require them to. Schoolhouse Rock, anyone? Okay. So if that proves not to be true, and if the public, the large majority, keeps saying, I would like this, and they don't respond, you start to think, well, maybe this is all fake. And that's when you get mad and start doing stuff that you wouldn't ordinarily do. So it's really important to make sure the democracy is real. And the tragic thing for me in watching this whole Trump thing is, it was like the ruling class in D.C., which should be wise enough to know that, they only exist because of democracy. They decided to prove to everybody watching that, in fact, it's not real. So Trump gets the nomination. The Republican Party, what was their answer to that? We'll take it from the convention. It's what? No, the voters voted for him. It's not your choice. I get it. Sorry, Jeb. But I'm not being mean. I'm just I get it. That's they're winners and losers. It's a contest. But what you're not allowed to do is steal it. Because, first of all, it's wrong. And second of all, it infuriates people. You steal it, maybe the fans sweep down from the stands onto the field. Maybe they get that mad. Who knows what they do if you treat them like that? Don't do that. But they did. So what they basically did was said, do you secretly suspect that this democracy is really an oligarchy run by a small number of people for their own benefit? Guess what? You're right! They pull the mask off. What are you doing, you nutcase, to do something like that? What you're doing is ensuring that the country is going to be way less happy, way less secure, way more suspicious of you, and much more likely to do something crazy, Dumbo. That's literally the last thing you do in a democracy. But they did it because they're not impressive. That's why, because they're self-centered and lacking wisdom. Not because, and I should just make one thing really clear. It's not because they're dumb. I use it as sort of a catch-all term for poor behavior and what motivates it, but that's not true. Like, they're actually smart. That's what makes it more infuriating. Intelligence is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom can't exist without self-awareness. As my father always used to say when I was little, the root of all wisdom is knowing how, he actually used a bad word, which I won't repeat, but is knowing how flawed you are. It's true. That's the point where you become wise, when you realize how screwed up you are, when you realize the limits of your own power. Then everything falls into perspective. What's the opposite of that? Hubris. Who's especially prone to that? Powerful men. Not just men, but especially men, I would say. Having known them, having been one at times. You get the feeling that, like, yeah, I don't think you know who you're dealing with here. And you become a buffoon, actually. And sooner or later, you're exposed as a buffoon. This is like the most basic human principle detailed at quite some length in the Old Testament, if you're interested. So anyway, that is a terrible and destabilizing thing. The answer is its mirror image. If you want things to calm down, apply democracy. It's really simple. And by the way, I'm not calling for direct democracy. Like, I get it. I took American history. We have a representative democracy that is designed to filter the passions of the majority through the kind of cool filter of wise people we elect to do that. And it's worked, actually, pretty well. Not perfectly, but pretty well. Better than any other country. And we need to do that again. So in other words, just because the majority all of a sudden wants free ice cream, it doesn't need to be free. But if they keep calling for free ice cream, you got to give them an ice cream discount at some point. Because it's their country, actually. So if the majority of people say, if they elect a president who wants to build a wall, and you're like, I don't think a wall is going to work, or I think it's kind of embarrassing to have a wall, I don't care what you think. Build a wall, pal. Because the cost of not building the wall is to tell people that they don't have a voice. This is the last thing I'll say. What do you think happens in the long run? By the way, you can't do that to anybody. It's not just about democracy, and it's not just about our government or whatever. It's about other people. If you have power and you misuse that power, they'll get you. Every single time. If you are rude and dismissive to enough people in public, just at like dinner parties or whatever, meeting them, and you're like, yeah, okay. Oh, you're not important? Yeah, sorry, excuse me. Like, there will come a time when one of those people will get you. People never forget being patronized or dismissed. They never forget it. Your own kids don't forget it. By the way, you can do whatever you want to your kids because they're literally powerless. So if you're like, you know what? I want you to wear a Viking hat to school today and every day. That's embarrassing, Mommy. I don't care. You're wearing a Viking hat to school. People make fun of me and beat on me. Tough. Viking hat for you. You could literally do that. Like, maybe you find that amusing. You just do that. At some point, that kid's going to turn 18. Because, by the way, they all do, despite what you want. Like, it just kind of happens. And at that point, what do you think the consequences are going to be of that kind of... Do you see what I'm saying? So the key mistake of people who hold power is believing that they will hold it forever. And that they can do whatever they want when they have it. And that is a lie that they tell themselves. And in the end, those people are going to get spanked really hard. And they're going to regret being so unwise and short-sighted and selfish during that fleeting moment when they did hold power.
Ok, hello anh em nha, chào mừng tất cả các anh em đã quay trở lại với channel của mình là Tiếng Black đây. Thì cũng nói chung là chắc là mấy anh em thấy là kênh mình là cái kênh chính của mình nó không có đăng được video. Nói chung là hiện tại là kênh mình nó cũng có một chút vấn đề các bạn. Nói chung là mình cũng khô quá á, cho nên là mình cũng mới kém cái kênh của mình mấy trăm triệu để mà mình trang trải cuộc sống của mọi người, cho nên nó là hiện tại kênh nó còn có tí trục trặc. Nói chung là đợi vài bữa nữa hết hợp đồng rồi mình lấy về mình làm lại nha anh em. Thì nói chung như thế này hôm nay là mình kêu quỷ dạ so sau lưng này nó theo mình để mà mình tổ chức một cái trò chơi. Mình mới điện tem khí NVL cũng bán kênh. Nó cũng bán kênh như mình. Nói chung á, tôi nó lại. Nói giờ các bạn nói chung là kênh mình hiện tại đang trục trặc, cho nên là mình sẽ thu xếp là mình làm ở bên đây vài hôm cho anh em xem cho đỡ buồn. Thì hôm nay mình có kêu nhóm của Nghĩa mình lên xuống nữa để mình lại mình quay nó nha các bạn. Đây nhóm của Nghĩa lên các bạn. Thì hôm nay là tao kêu anh em xuống đây hết, đó là đỡ tao muốn tổ chức anh em mình chơi một trò chơi gì. Nói chung là vui chơi có thương, nói chung là anh mới trúng được khúc. mới trút được thuốc.
Quân thủ cao em mới là mũi đó rồi.
Mới là mũi nó mới ra
Sao
nhà
nó giống gương mặt thật của nó dữ trời.
Nói chung là vậy đấy. Nói chung là hôm nay tao có một cái trò chơi kêu anh em xuống đây là nói chung là mình thứ nhất là mình vui chơi anh em với nhau. Nói chung là mấy hôm nay mình cũng buồn quá, mình nghĩ mình không có làm các bạn. Nói chung là thiệt sự là cơm mình gặp trục trặc, mình buồn quá, mình nghĩ mình không có làm. Thì hôm nay là sau 2 ngày mình ăn cho trát tán rồi các bạn. Bây giờ mình nói chung là cũng tinh thần nó bình tĩnh lại rồi. Hôm nay mình kêu anh em xuống để tổ chức một cái trò chơi ở đây. Để tôi lấy cái đây để cho anh em coi nha.
Đúng không?
Xuống này đứng cho nó sáng nhớ. Thì đứng đây.
Đứng nào sáng
sáng.
Hello chào em nha, mình máu xuống nha các bạn.
Mình máu mua cua cây ra luôn các bạn đấy, máu mua ra luôn á.
Coi đầu tiếng cho đè Shopee vậy.
Thì chắc là anh em thấy cái sao mình
một đối một rồi các bạn.
Nó tấu dữ quá tè.
Được rồi sáng nha.
Tấu không?
Sáng.
Thử. Được rồi, sáng này thì anh em thấy anh Thu đang cầm cái cây này không? Thì tâm nữa tự nhiên cái mặt đó là của anh Thu á chứ không phải của mày đâu, là y tôm mì tôm của anh Thu luôn á, không khác gì luôn á.
Quỳ đây.
Nói chung là cái cây đây là chắc anh